Okay, good morning. So we start a very a hot button issue, something that is politically very loaded, very sensitive, and we hope that we will we'll treat this with sensitivity. And I want to say at the outset, especially because this is going up on YouTube, that whatever the Torah view is, it goes without saying that one does not, it is not a Torah appropriate idea to treat people less than respectfully, just because they may not conform to our conceptions of So I mean, that's just in case, so that it should not be in any way mischaracterized. Having said that, the Jewish viewpoint on this topic, which is highly politicized, is going to be different to that of society, and that is, for that we are unapologetic. So we are going to talk about we're going to start looking at the sugya of what is called today transgenderism, as it is called today, and it is worth noting right at the outset that terminology and definitions change, and they change usually by virtue of society creating some sort of consensus around them. And this is really, really important. It's important at many different levels. This is not even about right or wrong. Let's leave any of those judgments, so to speak, at the door. But let's just I'm just going to make an observation right at the outset before we dive into the halacha. And we are going to divide this topic into, there are two parts. We're going to talk about the halacha of gender, what's called today gender reassignment surgery, sometimes called transsexual surgery, and so there is the philosophical underpinning, the hashkafa, the worldview, the way that we view these things, and then of course there is the halacha. And to what extent one informs or shapes the other is an interesting question. But just as, like I said at the outset, I want to take I just want to take a moment to reflect on the fact that definitions, even medical definitions, absolutely change. So the Bible, as it were, for certainly in America, for the definition of what is and isn't considered a mental health condition, is known as the DSM. Every so often it gets updated, and there was DSM-4 and then DSM-5. In DSM-4 there was something called gender dysphoria, right, which is when a person is psychologically traumatized by feeling that despite externally they appear to be male, but they feel quote unquote trapped in the wrong body, and they feel female and they want to be female, and they feel there's a disconnect and a dissonance between the genitalia, their physical body, and who they feel they are or ought to be. And this obviously must be I can only imagine, must be incredibly distressing. And it was characterized until relatively recently, we'll do another time, we'll go into the facts, but in DSM-4, the diagnostic manual that was used by psychiatrists and psychologists, gender dysphoria was a mental condition, a mental health issue, it was a mental illness. And therefore, it being classified as such, therefore it meant that you were eligible for therapy, for whatever route the clinicians decided whether it was reassignment surgery, whether it was something hormonal treatment, whether it was therapy, and all of the above. But it was defined as a mental health condition. Not so in DSM-5. And we need, at some point, we're not going to do that today, but it's and this has a lot of implications. So the words that we use and the terms that we use are very, very important. Now, I say that only because we are going to do this a little bit, well, what you may consider backwards. I don't consider it to be backwards at all. I consider it to be the right way to do it, which is, we start, as always, with Halacha. That's the way we start. We start with Halacha. And we see, what does Halacha have to say about identities? So here we live in an interesting world where, and this is said without judgment, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, it was pretty straightforward what it was a man. The concept male, man, woman was pretty straightforward. The definition, the word as it was used in society, with all its various legal and societal definitions and consequences, was pretty straightforward. Today, in a relatively short period of time, that landscape has utterly changed. I do not have Facebook, but I believe that on Facebook, at last count, I think there are 70 plus genders that one can identify as. And in theory, according to the many proponents of this, in theory it's infinite, it's malleable, and gender, and this is the key idea, gender becomes a social construct. It's connected to some extent to third wave feminism, and we don't want to go too deep into that because that's really not our topic. But as rabbis, that you will be going out into the world, you absolutely have to have an understanding of this, that sex and gender are not the same. That is the claim, okay? It was always considered to be pretty straightforward that if you had testicles and you were capable of reproducing that way, that was the definition of what it meant to be female, to be male, and if you had XX chromosomes and you were capable of giving birth, then you were female. And today this is seen very, very differently. Now, we're going to look into the halacha, and that's going to be our starting point. But I sent you this morning. Again, the photocopy is on the blink, so I would have photocopied it, and but instead I can see you've got good. You have access. You've all got it on a tablet. That's awesome. And I think we should look through this. And if we had more time, I would almost give it to you as homework, because I think this is a good way to get you to where I would like to get you, which is as an entree to the halacha. This is an article from a website, and it's called "The 8 Genders in the Talmud." Okay, let's go through it. I'm going to go through it without comment.
Okay.
All right, and because what I want to do from this is elicit from you your critique, agree or disagree, and okay. So I'm just going to read it. Thought non-binary gender was a modern concept? Think again. The ancient Jewish understanding of gender was far more nuanced than many assume. The Talmud, a huge and authoritative compendium of Jewish legal traditions, contains in fact no less than 8 gender designations, including Zachar, male, Nekeva, female, androgynous, having both male and female characteristics. I don't know whether the word exists in German. It's a Greek word, and in England in English you actually can use it to say that somebody, they in fashion you could say there was. You have the androgynous look where baggy whatever, and it's not clear. How do you say? Wie sagen das auf Deutsch? Androgyn. Okay, thank you. Okay, so that's the third one, having both male and female characteristics. And again, I'm not going to comment. 4 of the alleged 8 genders in the Talmud, tumtum, lacking sexual characteristics. 5, Eilonit Hama, Eilonis Chama, identified female at birth, but later naturally developing male characteristics. 6, Eilonis Adam, identified female at birth, but later developing male characteristics through human intervention. 7, Suris Chama, identified male at birth, but later naturally developing female characteristics. 8, Suris Adam, identified male at birth and later developing female characteristics through human intervention. And I should add, what that means is it's castration, chemical or manual castration.
Which is not kosher?
That's we're not. Again, that's irrelevant.
Okay.
The author here is suggesting, given that these are terms that are used, as indeed they are, in Mishnayos and in Gemaras, with reference to various halachas ranging from Yevomas to Bikurim.
Okay.
So the author here is suggesting that these therefore create 8 identities, 8 gender identities in Torah. This is what the suggestion is. In fact, not only did the rabbis recognize 6 genders that were neither male nor female, they had a tradition that the first human being was both. And that indeed is true. I'm going to leave that out. We will come back to this. I will go refer back to this, but much later on. Okay. Fine. Let's go to the next paragraph. For the rabbis, see that paragraph? For the rabbis, the androgynous wasn't just a thing of the mythic past. The androgynous was in fact a recognized gender category in their present. Though not with 2 heads, only both kinds of sex organs. The term appears no less than 32 times in the Mishnah and 238 times in the Talmud. Most of these citations are not variations on this myth, but rather discussions about how Jewish law applies to one who has both male and female sexual characteristics. That the androgynous is from a halachic perspective neither male nor female is confirmed by the Mishnah Bikurim 4 Perek Daled Mishnah Aleph, which states explicitly the androgynous in some ways is like a man, in some ways is like a woman, in other ways he's like men and women, and in others he's neither like men or women. Because Hebrew has no gender-neutral pronoun, the Mishnah uses a male pronoun for the androgynous, although this is obviously insufficient given the rabbinic description of the person. Reading on, we find the androgynous is for the rabbis in many ways like a man. They dress like a man, they're obligated in all commandments like a man, they marry women, and their white emissions lead to impurity, ziva. However, in other ways, androgynous is like a woman. They don't share in inheritance like sons, they do not eat of sacrifices reserved only for men, and their red discharge leads to impurity. The Mishnah goes on to list ways in which an androgynous is just like any other human being, insofar as somebody who kills him or curses him is liable, somebody who murders an androgynous is a murderer, but the androgynous is unlike a man or a woman in other important legal respects. For example, such a person is not liable for entering the temple in a state of impurity, as both a man and a woman would be. As should now be clear, says the author, for anybody who then watches this video, we're just going through this article. The rabbinic interest in these gender ambiguous categories is largely legal. Since halacha was structured for a world in which most people were either male or female, applying the law to individuals who didn't fall neatly into one of these 2 categories was challenging. As Rabbi Yossi remarks in the same chapter of the Mishnah, the androgynous is a unique creature, and the sages could not decide about him. In many cases, androgynous is lumped together with other kinds of non-binary persons as well as other marginalized populations, including women, slaves, the disabled, and minors. For example, concerning participation in the 3 pilgrimage festivals, Aliyah L'Regel, right, during which the Jews of antiquity would travel to the temple in Jerusalem. The Mishnah of Chagiga opens, all are obligated on the 3 pilgrimage festivals to appear in the temple, except for a cherushet of a cotton, a deaf mute, an imbecile or a minor, a tumtum, an androgynous, women and slaves who are not emancipated, the lame, the blind, the sick, etc. As this Mishnah indicates, it is only healthy, free adult men who are obligated to appear at the temple. People who are not adult men and men who are enslaved or too old or unwell are exempt. Okay. As we've already stated, androgynous was not the only person of ambiguous gender identified by the rabbi. Similarly, the rabbis recognized one whose sexual characteristics are lacking or difficult to determine, called a tumtum. Rabbi Yossi, who said the androgynous was legally challenging for the sages because that person had both genitalia, but the tumtum was easier to figure out, said Rabbi Yossi. The rabbis also recognized that some people's sexual characteristics can change with puberty, either naturally or through intervention. Less common than the androgynous and tumtum, but still found throughout rabbinic texts, are the ailonis, who is born with organs identified as female at birth but develops male characteristics at puberty, or no sex characteristics at all, and the soris, who is born with male identified organs and later develops features recognized as female. And these changes can happen over time, naturally, suris chama, meaning as a result of exposure to radiation of the sun or something, or human intervention, meaning castration. For the rabbis, what was most significant about the ailonis and the soris is that they are presumed infertile. And sometimes in English there's a saying, a eunuch. Right, you may have come across that. Somebody in the courts in the Middle Ages, they had these.
Presumed infertile from the onset.
Altogether, yeah.
Or through intervention.
And therefore, for example, the Mishnah says a woman who's 20 years old and did not grow 2 pubic hairs has to bring a proof that she's 20, and from that point onwards, if she hasn't had 2 pubic hairs, we assume she's an ailonis. If she marries and her husband dies childless, she can't perform chalitza, nor can she enter into yibum. Okay, so I don't. So here we are. This is pretty much this is the concept as is put in this article. Mm-hmm. It's a little bit unfair what I'm going to ask you, but what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on this? In other words, on the basis of what you've seen here, if I were then to ask you, from a Torah perspective, how many genders do you think there are?
Depends what you mean with gender looks like.
What is usually understood and meant by the term? Let's not overly complicate it.
Still 2.
Sorry?
Still 2.
You think 2, but what about these?
The old variation of those 2.
Right,
they're not something different.
Well, they are
either a thing which goes from one to the other, which is also, I would not say needs a split, like.
So we're not talking yet about the possibility of changing, or maybe one could argue that this exactly is what we're talking about. So to put the nail on the head, I think what you're trying to say, let me suggest, and you can agree or disagree, I think there may well be 3. I think there may well be 3. We have Zohar and Nekeva, right? Male and female. Then there is what is sometimes called intersex and what is sometimes called a hermaphrodite, which is somebody, we have to speak clearly in such a shia. Somebody who has both a penis and a vagina.
Right, but
somebody who has the genitalia of both male and female, and these.
By birth.
Sorry?
By birth, meaning.
By birth, correct.
Right.
That is the way they are born. Right. That is very clear. This is what the Mishnah and all these various Gemaras are referring to, is somebody who has a somebody who is a hermaphrodite, who has both sets of genitalia. I think today they would be called intersex. Now, what I'm not sure about, and I really need to research this,
right,
which I'm pretty certain, but I may be wrong, is a hermaphrodite capable of fathering a child? I maybe you know the answer to that. I don't.
I mean, the question would be, first
do you know the answer to that?
No.
I'm not sure. Is a hermaphrodite capable of becoming pregnant?
I heard that sometimes with those cases it's that they tend to one more, and so they have like the characteristics of the other, but just on a little, like just a note of it. And
I think
right,
they're
so
infertile. I think they're born infertile.
They can mate with the male and use the male-derived sperm to fertilize their eggs. meaning take the egg out and fertilize it.
Can a hermaphrodite make a woman pregnant? And can a hermaphrodite become pregnant?
Right.
I should have really have researched this before I
Should maybe add human.
Sorry?
Should maybe add human.
Well, yes, we're talking, yes, yeah.
Hermaphrodite can either reproduce by virtue or self-fertilization, or they can mate with a male and use male...
Can a hermaphrodite become pregnant? You know what, it's moot. It's probably very easy to research. We need to research and find out. But either way, I think there possibly could be room to say that indeed somebody who has both might be... It sounds to me, again, I'm going to have to look at this in a bit more detail, but it sounds to me like Chazal, we have to paskin, right? We have to paskin here. We have to decide, is such a person male or female? In Halacha, we only have there are two categories in terms of gender, insofar as all areas of halacha are concerned. Halachas which apply to men, halachas which apply to women. We now need to work out, what do we do with this androgynous being?
I mean, the halachas apply from both sides on this being, from the male and female, as we read.
That is the shaila. The question is not, do we now create a new a classification, a new category? There is no third gender. The question, like Rabbi Yossi is saying, is do we treat this person as male or as female in halacha? And even though, of course, because of the difficulty, they end up having a different status. And this is what I think the mistake that the error that this author has made. And it's always, by the way, an error when you try to use Torah for some sort of to fit into some political narrative. That is never appropriate. And this is true whether you want whether you're coming from a right-wing perspective or a left-wing perspective, or neither apologetics nor polemics are appropriate. Torah has to be learned and studied within its own context. And it's very simple. Again, like we've said so many times, we live in a world where it's all about, do I have the right to use a woman's bathroom? Do I have the right to enter a competitive sport as part of the women's team? We come at this from a whole different arc. Do I have to go up to the Yerushalayim for Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot? Do I have to put on tefillin? Do I have to do chalitza or yibum? First of all, the first thing to note is that the entire language, the whole framing of the question is totally different. Number one, and number two, the Chazal were struggling to put this person into a category of obligation. Does this person slot into the category of obligation of a man or of a woman? With all the halachas that go with it, and they struggled, and they said it's in some ways it's like this, but they didn't say, androgynous is, even though there is an opinion, androgynous beria b'fnei atzmai, there is such an opinion. And so, maximum, you would end up with 3. A tumtum is somebody whose genitalia are covered over, and we just don't know. They are either male or female. We just don't know. They're covered over. Eilenis and a Sris Chama, again, there's no suggestion. I think it is a very basic error to suggest that they are something on their own. That it is a male that is castrated or infertile, or a female that is unable to reproduce. But there's no question of it being a separate gender. So I think it is always dangerous when you try to shoehorn Torah or anything else into some sort of 21st century political narrative. Torah is deserving of respect, that it needs to be seen within its own context. And that's what I just wanted to start off showing you, that you will come across this sort of stuff, and you have to have the intellectual clarity and the honesty to be able to say Torah is viewed within its own context. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at some of the Makoros. Again, I will I managed to photocopy something. The photocopier was on the blink, and therefore I'm not coming at this in the order that I would like to. So what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at an article written quite a while ago, the truth be told, although I can't find the exact date, but you'll see. But we're starting with the halacha. So we're going to look at, this is an article authored by Rabbi Bleich of Yeshiva University. It's in his book here, Judaism and Healing, and we'll go through it because it's a good summary of most of the main halachic issues. Okay, so we're looking at this from halacha. Let's go through this. So transsexuals are persons born with the anatomy of one sex, but who suffer from an identification with the other sex, which in many instances is total and lifelong. It is claimed by some scientists doing research in this area that this abnormality is the result of hormone disturbances which are quite likely prenatal in origin. In a rapidly increasing number of cases, transsexualism is now being treated medically by a combination of hormone therapy and sex change surgery. While such operations were performed in Europe on an intermittent basis as early as 1930, but such operations have become prevalent in our country, and he's referring to the United States, only since the late 1960s. And again, these statistics will be way out of date because this book was published in 1981. So a lot has changed since then. But still it's useful for us in terms of the halacha. Here he writes there's an estimated 10,000 transsexuals in the United States, of whom approximately 1,500 have changed their sex by means of surgery. Public awareness of this phenomenon has been heightened in recent years as a result of the publication of Conundrum, an autobiography by Jan, formerly James Morris, in which the author discusses his own transsexualism with skill and sensitivity. Despite earlier enthusiasm on the part of some psychiatrists for sex change surgery as a treatment, psychiatric studies now indicate that surgery is of little effect in improving the condition of transsexuals. This, I believe, is still the case, that even those that do undergo surgery, the impact on their psychiatric and on their state of mind and feeling better is, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, again, have to do a little bit more research, I think is relatively minimal. So the suicide risk and suicide ideation and self-harm and all that sort of stuff does not change significantly post-surgery. Again, this is without comment as to why that might be so. There are those who will say, yeah, that's because society don't accept us enough. It's not. And that's moot. Who knows? Two prominent psychiatrists recently completed an evaluation of the family relationships, general stability and adaptability to daily routine of a number of former patients who had undergone such operations. They discovered no significant difference in adjustment between those who were treated by means of sex reversal surgery and those who were not treated surgically. You've got the notes at the end here. This is from the Archives of General Psychiatry, August 1979. So it is old. These things are old. Right. Now let's get, this is really just the introduction. We want to get started with the halacha. Sex change operations involving the surgical removal of sexual organs are clearly forbidden on the basis of the explicit biblical prohibition, u'ma'uch v'chosus v'nosuk v'chorus. And that which is mauled or crushed or torn or cut you shall not offer unto the Lord, nor should you do this in your land. So it is an issa d'oraisa to castrate a human being. Certainly a man. Here that's referring to a man. Sterilization of women is also prohibited as recorded in Evan Ezra Siman Hay. Okay? Now, I'll just stop here to note that sometimes people who suffer from prostate cancer have the surgery, if you ever come across that, and somebody who needs to have an operation, a prostatectomy, and an important shaila needs to be asked as to how that can be done in such a way, or whether and how it can be done in such a way to still conform to halacha. Okay, because sometimes it involves a form of castration. Okay. So for example, a vasectomy is absolutely osur in halacha. Yes? The cutting of the vas deferens, which essentially means that a person cannot have children, is an issa d'oraisa. Okay? One authority notes, now who is this? note 2. This is Reb Meir Amsel in Hamar. Okay? He notes that yet another prohibition is also applicable to sex change procedures, a consideration which may extend as well to hormone treatment for the purposes of sex change. The Torah says, a woman may not wear that which pertains to a man, nor a man shall put on a woman's garment. And this is not limited to the wearing of apparel associated with the opposite sex. And this, by the way, is in and of itself. Very often, if somebody cross-dressing, as it's sometimes called, I don't know what it's called in German, but to be an active transvestite is the word in English, is in itself an Issa D'Oraisa. So, very often, somebody who feels that they should be the other gender, and whether or not they have the surgery, but then for them to wear the clothes of the other than the gender which they were born with, is in and of itself an Issa D'Oraisa. So this also needs to be noted. Okay? So Rabbi Meir Amsel here suggests it's not limited to the wearing of apparel associated with the opposite sex, but encompasses any action uniquely identified with the opposite sex. So, for example, shaving of the armpits or dyeing of the hair by a male. Don't know if you knew this. It's in Shulchan Aruch. Yeah? A procedure designed to transform sexual characteristics, it definitely violates the very essence of this prohibition. Okay? So, to cut a very long story very short, certainly we will see some other Makoros. And there's a very interesting tshuva from the Tzitz Eliezer, which we will look at in some length, because he's perhaps one of the more interesting approaches to this whole topic. But it would appear to be cut and dried that there does not appear to be any heta for somebody to go through with what we call today gender reassignment surgery. Then let's look at this post facto. Once a sexual transformation has actually been effected, then a host of practical halachic questions arise. The resolution of these questions hinges upon the crucial conceptual problem of whether or not a change of sex has indeed occurred from the point of view of halacha. Yeah. Whatever society may or may not say, that because you've had this surgery, or sometimes even if you haven't, today it would appear that, I'm not sure what the up-to-date law here in Germany is, but I'm not sure if I were today, let's say, to decide and to identify as a woman, what rights and legal rights does that immediately give me? Could I change my... Sorry?
In Germany, that's enough. You don't even have to undergo the surgery. You can just say you identify.
So I identify as a woman. I could now have my passport. Assuming I had a German passport, I could just change it to woman. Yeah. My everything would be Weiblich. I get a new birth certificate, and therefore I would have access to women's health.
Trump could have been the first female president.
Sorry?
Trump could have been the first female
He
president.
could, right, yeah. Right. So, okay. So there we go. Now, halacha.
There we go.
Halacha.
Yeah.
Fine, thank you for that. I did not know it was that. And then can you change your mind? Can you do?
Yes.
You can. How often?
I don't know.
It should be interesting.
Yeah.
But
I can find out for next stream.
Yeah, okay. There's still a lot of research to be done. Okay, so the question then, of course, is what does halacha have to say?
Right.
The fact that the German law or the US law or British law would say that does not mean that halacha would say this. So it should be emphasized that while sexual organs can be removed, medical science is incapable, at least at the moment, of substituting functional reproductive organs of the opposite sex. So sex change procedures involve the construction of simulated sexual organs devoid of reproductive powers, right? So the most obvious halachic questions regarding the sexual status of such individuals is with regard to marriage and divorce. I believe there was a case not that long ago, and Bli Neda, I'm going to try and find out from the London Based-In. There was a case not that long ago, I believe, of somebody who went through the process, whether it was through surgery or certainly identifying as a woman. So, at the risk of making up the names, let's say Chaim now becomes Susan, right? Let's say in law. Now this makes there's one area where halacha is forced, possibly, to recognize the relevance of this, and that is in a get, because a person's name, it's a massive sugya, massive topic, somebody's name. So you may possibly have to write Chaim Hamachuna Susan.
What is Hamachuna?
Hamachuna. So there's two ways that we can refer to somebody in a get. It's either, if it is a Shem Kodesh, we say demiskari, that is called kriya, and if it's a kinoi, then it's not the name, but it's more like a nickname, then it's hamachuna. So either demiskari or hamachuna. So it would be possibly, and this is something we're going to have to look at, whether it be the hamachuna Susan, maybe. So marriage and divorce is the most obvious one, and with regards to their status vis-a-vis the respective obligations of men and women in the performance of mitzvahs. So this is the question: would halacha recognize the fact that somebody has undergone surgery? I think it's very safe to say that we don't need to look anywhere to say that this concept of identifying, just deciding, for whatever reason, deciding that you are trapped in the wrong body and you are now a man or a woman, halacha would absolutely, no question, not take account of that at all. Yeah, that's sure. The shaila, what he's discussing here, is what would be somebody who underwent some sort of medical procedure. So, Teshuvas B'Somim Roish. Now, it should be noted, B'Somim Roish was at one stage, it's been attributed to the Rosh, but there's a lot of literature about the fact that it's maybe a forgery, and it's generally assumed that it wasn't written by the Rosh. It was written by somebody else. Who exactly, it's not clear. But anyway, the Teshuvas B'Somim Roish questions, and we're going to look at these. All of these we're going to do inside, okay? But just for today, I want to give you a bit of a span of some of the opinions. He questions whether a man whose genitalia have been completely removed needs divorce his wife in order to dissolve their marriage, or whether a divorce is unnecessary since the male has been sexually transformed and hence a new body has appeared and is comparable to a woman's. That was the shaila. Somebody, Nebuch, for whatever reason, their genitalia were removed, a man's genitalia were totally removed, and the question was, does he need a get? That was the shaila there. But B'Somim Roish reaches no definitive conclusion with regard to whether or not a divorce is necessary in the event that the operation is performed subsequent to entry into a valid marriage. However, B'Somim Roish strongly asserts that regardless of their status with regard to other matters, once his genitalia have been removed, the person in question is no longer competent to contract a valid marriage as a man. Mm-hmm. So he could not, if he doesn't have koyach gavra, as it's called in halacha, if he is unable to function as a man, he cannot. If he doesn't have the genitalia, then he cannot create kiddushin. Although not stated explicitly, it may be assumed that according to the B'Somim Roish, such a person is also unqualified to contract a marriage as a woman, because he doesn't have female genitalia either. Okay? So for B'Somim Roish, identity insofar as a marriage is concerned depends entirely on the presence of the appropriate genitalia. No mention is made of the presence or absence of secondary sexual characteristics. And indeed, it's not difficult to understand why they're deemed irrelevant. There is no evidence that the transformation of secondary sexual characteristics affects status in any way insofar as Jewish law is concerned. Mm-hmm. There is at least one source which apparently declares that a male cannot acquire the status of a woman by means of surgery. Rabbeinu Hananel, quoted by Ibn Ezra in his commentary on Vayikra Yud Ches Chof Beis, declares that intercourse between a normal male and a male in whom artificial female sexual organs have been fashioned by means of surgery constitutes sodomy. It's mishkav zocha. This would appear to be the case according to Rabbeinu Hananel, even if the male genitalia are removed. Okay? Let's just do one more paragraph. The corollary to this question arises with regard to a woman who has acquired the sexual characteristics of a male as a result of transsexual surgery. Okay? A woman who acquires the sexual characteristics of a male. A 19th century author, Rabbi Yosef Falaji, Yosef Es Echov, opines that no divorce is necessary in order to dissolve a marriage contracted prior to such transformation. He goes beyond the position of the Besamim Roish, who didn't reach a definitive conclusion. So in opposition to Rabbi Pelagi's view, it may, however, be argued that gender is irreversibly determined at birth and that sex, insofar as halacha is concerned, cannot be transformed by surgical procedures. This position is particularly cogent in view of the fact that the fertile organs of the opposite sex can never be acquired by means of surgery. Right? Even with all the advances they have today, a man cannot become a woman and become pregnant. The view that sexual identity cannot be changed by means of surgery would appear to be the position of Rabbeinu Hananel, and according to this would appear to govern all halachic questions regarding sexual identity. Okay, we'll stop here for today. We've made a bit of a start.